Hello, everyone. I'm Hans Engel from the Directors Guild of Canada. Welcome to our 10th episode of DGC Masterclass via Zoom. These are incredibly challenging times like nothing we've ever faced before, which makes me even more grateful that you are joining us here tonight. We must be vigilant and engaged, and I believe that in order to engage at this level, we must also find time to disengage and recharge. Through these masterclasses, we're bringing you together with some of the most interesting creatives in the industry today, in Canada and internationally. The DGC prides itself on being the place where the creative community comes together to celebrate and discuss the work. We're going behind the scenes and talking to some of the top creatives in the industry, covering directors, designers, picture and sound editors, with a new episode or two every week. You'll receive a new invitation with a specific link to tune in. So far, we've had Emmy-winning director Jean-Marc Vallée, Emmy-winning editor Kelly Dixon, Oscar-winning designers David and Sandy Wasco, a special event with brilliant Indigenous filmmaker Jeff Barnaby, two-time Oscar-nominated doc filmmaker Firas Fayyad, two-time Oscar-winning sound editor Karen Baker-Landers, Oscar and Palme d'Or nominee Adam Egoyan, Oscar-nominated designers KK Barrett and Patrice Vermette, and last night we had iconic Bruce McDonald. Tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator. His debut feature, The Hanging Garden, featuring Sarah Polley, won both the People's Choice Award and Best Canadian Film Award at the Toronto International Film Festival. His follow-up, The Event, also featuring Sarah, won the Siegessäule Award at the Berlin Film Festival. His films, including Cloudburst, Beefcake, and Three Needles, have garnered awards at more than 50 film festivals worldwide. A three-time Sundance alumnus, he's been awarded the Academy of Canadian Cinema and Television, the U.S. Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and nominated by the Writers Guild of Canada and the Directors Guild of Canada. Film and TV projects he directed have been nominated for 36 ACC TV Awards and 37 ACTRA Awards. Incredible. His recent film, Splinters, debuted at TIFF and will be in limited release this summer and broadcast on CBC in the fall. His newest film, Stage Mother, starring Jackie Weaver, Lucy Liu, and Adrienne Grenier, premiered at the Palm Springs International Film Festival in January, where the audience voted it Best of the Fest. Stage Mother will be released by E1 in the US and Canada on August 21st. Please welcome Tom Fitzgerald.
Hello.
He is. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's featured guest. She is a Governor General's award-winning writer, director, producer, whose dramatic features include Away From Her, nominated in 2007 for an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay, and winner of the 2008 Genie Awards for Best Motion Picture and Achievement in Direction. And Take This Waltz, starring Seth Rogen, Michelle Williams, and Sarah Silverman. Her third film, Stories We Tell, was awarded Best Documentary by the Toronto Film Critics Association, the New York Film Critics Circle, the National Board of Review, and the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. It was also on the shortlist for the 2013 Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. She served as executive producer on Atia Khan's amazing documentary, A Better Man. Her adaptation of Margaret Atwood's Alias Grace for Netflix and CBC, which she executive produced, garnered 6 Canadian Screen Awards, including Best Screenplay, Director, Actress, and Limited Series. All that, not to mention a very distinguished and lengthy career as an actor. Please welcome Sarah Polley.
Hi.
Hi, Sarah. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, before I turn it over to Tom and Sarah, I'd like to point out to the audience the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type questions into that box. Tom will be watching that throughout the night. He'll try to get to as many questions as he possibly can, but know that he may not be able to get to all of them. But type them in at any point throughout, and he'll have a look. All right, Tom and Sarah, have a great time. Over to you. I'm out of here.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for asking me to do this.
Thank you for doing that.
I was thinking about it and thought that even though I'm 11 years older than you when we met when you were 17, I have in fact always learned from you as a filmmaker. And that when we met on my very first film project, you were a teenager, but I had 3 days of experience on professional film sets, and you had like 12 years experience on sets, and probably more than any other person who worked on the film. So I would watch you on those days that you were there, and if you were sort of standing around on set, I'd ask the AD, what's Sarah doing? And they'd say, she's waiting for a blocking. And I'd say, oh, well, do it. And I would think, what's a blocking? What are we about to do? Who knows? So participants, I invite you to ask questions as we go along. Since Sarah is one of the eminent writers in our industry, I thought I'd start by asking questions about that. Even though we are a Directors Guild event tonight, I feel like for Sarah, writing is a really big part of her filmmaking process. And I have stuff I want to know. So I want to ask my questions. And if you have questions about screenwriting and how Sarah does it, then that's what I'm going to be talking about for the next few minutes. And I've noticed that when I scroll through the questions, it kind of looks like I'm masturbating a little bit. So I apologize for that in advance.
Gotta make a splash. Gotta make a splash on a Zoom call. Got a lot of them these days.
So adaptation, Sarah, you really are one of the industry's great adapters of literature to screen. You took The Bear Came Over the Mountain and turned it into Away From Her. More recently, you had great success with Alias Grace. So I really want to talk about process. You have a piece of literature that you love, and you have a computer. What is your first step in taking something off of the literary page and onto the screenplay?
I think it varies hugely from project to project. I think as a sort of overall principle, what I've noticed is most important to me when I'm adapting something is figuring out the space between me and the piece of writing. So who was I as a reader when I was reading that piece? What did it evoke for me specifically? And sort of exploring the space of the relationship between you and the piece of writing seems to be more integral than just mining the piece of material and trying to bring it to life as literally as possible. And I think in a lot of cases I have been very true to the story. I think with Alias Grace, I was very true to it, but I think what was important for me was looking back at why it affected me so deeply, why I felt so compelled to translate it into another medium, and to really ask the difficult questions that occur when something moves you really deeply in ways you don't understand. Sam Shepard once said this thing to me. He talked about how I worked with him once, and he was talking about why he generally veered away from making films and writing screenplays, you know, in later years. And he said, you know, I think when writing's, I'm going to paraphrase here and it won't be his words, so, you know, he was much more eloquent than this, but he said something about how when writing works, it's because something in your subconscious that you don't understand impacts something in the reader's subconscious that they don't understand. And as soon as you have to articulate and explain it, it loses all of its power. And in fact, it was never going to affect anybody anyway. So the whole process of making a film, there's so many meetings where you're forced to explain the intent and what you mean and what you're trying to get across, and people are trying to get you to become clearer about it. And what he said really spoke to me, that I think that when adaptation is at its most powerful, it's because something in you is provoked in a way that's not necessarily comfortable, and you have to find out why, and you have to ask those questions of yourself. So for me, it's like a very deep internal provocation. But I feel like everything I just said kind of mystifies it. And I think for me, the biggest thing I feel, the most important thing I feel about adaptation is that anybody can do it. That we create a language around screenwriting that makes it seem like some special skill, that somebody who, you know, was really listening to people and really curious about the people in their lives and new films and read a lot wouldn't be able to actually do if they just had the confidence to try. So I think adaptation is really, again, the process has really varied from film to film. Not that I've made that many. I hate it when I start saying things with text. It's like in my body of work, which includes 3 films and 1 miniseries. So,
Well,
yeah.
you're talking about your approach to the art of storytelling, and what about the craft? How do you actually, what's your first task? I see you're sitting in front of a bulletin board, so I'm kind of onto you with the index cards there behind you.
It's a prop. It's a prop. It used to be, actually, this is a good adaptation story. So this was covered in multicolored index cards because I've always wanted to do that. And I'm always really jealous when people do that. So it looked really impressive. It was a project from about 1.5 years ago that I haven't been working on. But it was really awesome as a background for a Zoom call because I looked like I was being super productive, which I'm not. And then for this chat, I put up some little images and index cards that don't mean much to create the same impression. But basically the index card thing hasn't worked for me so well. I end up having this very boring process of literally, you know, the first thing I do is I, from memory, write down the moments in the piece of writing that I know have to be in there, that I know have to be in whatever I make because they're part of the reason I wanted to make it in the first place. The second thing I do is the images that have occurred to me and the shots that have occurred to me while reading that piece of writing. Because I think for me, the visual side of things is the thing I've had to work the hardest to learn. I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always loved writing. I've never been scared of writing, but I've always been very scared of the visual side of filmmaking. So for me, I start with imagery because I know that's what I can't compromise on and what I have to focus myself on the most, just because it's instinctually not where I come from. And then I kind of, so the things that are most important to me and the imagery, and then very rarely has that not already been too much. So it's like you can go back and find all the pivotal moments that you forgot, which I always do meticulously. I'll read a book, 10 times and make notes and put more and more in. Inevitably, all of the rest of that ends up on the floor at some point because it just doesn't fit. I find those integral moments that spoke to you, along with the moments you came up with that were not in the book as you were reading that you would have liked to add to sort of put your experience of the book into the film, and then images are more than enough to create a film or miniseries. What you're not lacking material there, I don't think. What you're lacking is some kind of organization and momentum, and then that's for me where the work happens.
It's really fascinating to me. So you're not actually starting with a piece of literature on your computer as your starting place. It's your memories as a reader, as an artist. What stayed with you is your actual starting point with the screenplay.
And sometimes you've made them up. That's what's interesting. Sometimes you've had an idea of a scene and it stuck with you. And this is what I mean about the space between you and the piece of writing is you projected something that actually wasn't there. And then it's a question of, can you actually make that work? Or is it actually better to be true to what was there that evoked that in you? But very often I've had moments that were like, I have to make that one scene happen. I have to hear actors say those words, or I have to see that image and I'll read it and it'll be something different than what I remembered it to be.
John Kassar is asking, are you already thinking about directing as you write? Is that what the imagery you're talking about means?
Hi, John Kassar. I know John Kassar from when he was a camera operator on Road to Avonlea. And he was one of the nicest crew people I ever worked with and was so kind and protective of me on some very hard days. So hi, John, nice to see you. Am I already thinking about directing? I am now, yeah, but that's taken some time, I think. And I think that's been part of, for me, the biggest learning curve has been the visual stuff. And I finally feel like I'm in a place where I can think visually instinctually, but that took a really long time for that to get ingrained for me. And it took a lot of help from people like Luc Montpellier, who, spent countless hours with me on every project, helping me feel confident with a visual language and making me believe that I had that visual language. I may or may not have, but I think that belief in yourself actually leads to creativity, and the dimming of the anxiety that you can't do something creates the space for things to happen. But yeah, I think now I am thinking of directing the film while I'm reading something. Maybe not the first time through, but as soon as I'm starting to write, I'm now thinking in shots, and I'm thinking of actors. I don't think it's necessary to do that. And I think if I'd heard someone say that, 15 years ago, I would have been really intimidated, and I wouldn't have wanted to write a screenplay. And I didn't do that at first, certainly for none of my short films. But I think I've started to now. What about you, John? Share that in the chat.
And Andrew's asking, he's saying what you said about Sam Shepard really resonates with him. He particularly hates explaining his work, a lot of which he feels is subconscious stuff, and that he's channeling it. So how do you get past your relationship with the material as you describe, and make it into something you can pitch to get funding?
I hope there's no funders on this call right now.
There's not.
In general, I've had really good luck with the people who finance my films where I haven't had to bullshit that much. That said, there are certain things they have to tell their bosses and sell to, so you have to sort of make it easy for them to sell it up. So here's what I think gets really complicated with filmmaking, which is why I'd really like to write something other than film at some point. I think there's the film you want to make, and there's the film that you need to sell. And I think sometimes those things have quite a lot in common. Sometimes they just cross over a little bit. But you have to figure out how you can frame a film to sell it in such a way that people will give you money, but not so extremely falsely that you forget the film you're trying to make, because I've seen that happen too. I've seen filmmakers come up with a pitch, and then they make the pitch instead of the film they were trying to make. So I think that's a really complex and difficult process. I think also you don't want to convince people you're going to deliver something you're not planning on delivering. But there's some salesmanship in it. And I think one of the tragedies to me, as I've watched people who started out, my peers who didn't get to make a lot of films, is some of them were a lot more talented than the people who are successful, but they were terrible at pitching. And it's a very specific model that exists for pitching films. And it's the pitch of the bombastic straight white male. And we're all emulating that. We're all like, when we go into those pitch rooms, like that's what we've been taught to do, is like, I'm going to sell you this thing. I'm utterly confident. I'm totally in control. You don't give a sense of being collaborative, because that somehow, evokes weakness of vision. And I think it's really left a lot of incredibly talented filmmakers behind, not just because of systemic discrimination, but also because there's a kind of cultural norm of pitching a film that is very specific. And I've seen people not being able to play that game, which actually that exact quality in them makes them better artists, and they've been left behind. So yeah, I think it's a very complex process, and one that you have to kind of negotiate on your own and with your own ethical compass, because there are strange compromises that can be made and maybe shouldn't be made, or maybe need to be made. And I think that's a very personal process of checking in with yourself. And, it's a weird world.
When you are not starting with somebody else's piece of literature, is the process of writing from scratch, from your imagination, original screenplay, very different? Does it feel different?
I mean, I put a lot of pressure on myself to make the author happy, which I think some people would say is not a good idea, but I haven't felt like that has led for me to any compromises or made what I've done less. I mean, it may not be very good, but it's not because of that. So I feel like
but it is very good.
Thanks. That tension though goes out of the process of, wanting to be faithful to something or wanting to honor something. At the same time, it's such a pleasure to adapt, because I'm assuming you're working with material you love, right? I mean, I'm working with material I love. So to get to live and walk around inside a book or a short story that you love, and then you kind of like get that language for your own piece. It feels so rude in a way. It feels so unfair, you know, like, especially when you win an award, you know, for basically pilfering someone famous's really good writing. And it's a strange process. So I think it's more vulnerable when you write an original screenplay, and it's less fun for me because I don't have that exquisite feeling of getting to live inside a work of literature that I love.
I would think that the original films you've done, like Take This Waltz and Stories We Tell, must be very vulnerable experiences in the writing.
Yeah, very vulnerable and very much, you feel more lost, I think. Because I think when I'm reading something, I want to make film, but it's because I see it. I suddenly see it, and I feel with Take This Waltz and certainly with Stories We Tell, it just feels like grappling around in the dark. I mean, I know everyone's supposed to be able to see the final film in their head. I certainly don't. There's certain moments I see of it, but mostly the stuff I've made or the scenes I've made that I really feel work were the ones I felt the most lost in and had no idea. I knew all the elements I wanted to be there, but I didn't know what that added up to until I saw it.
So when you're working from a piece of literature,
I'm curious though, do you feel like that? Do you see a film in your head when you, like, before you make it?
you're asking me?
Yeah.
You're playing this around on me?
I've made more movies than I have, so, you know.
I start with images, always with images. And I think that comes from my background. I never, as I mentioned earlier, didn't know anything about making movies when I started. I was educated in visual art painting. So I really, to me, telling stories in film was entirely about images. And maybe like writing a song, you sometimes make the melody and put the words in afterwards. And so I really do start that way. So we have some questions from our participants. Do you rewrite, since we're on writing? This is from Paul Day. Do you rewrite in the cutting room, or do you like to stay true to the way it was written?
I mean, I think there's always some rewriting in the cutting room. And I think the biggest mistake I make, you know, is I decide not to cut the 20 pages I should, which means you end up with 20 minutes too long in the cutting room, which means taking out a huge chunk. That's just, it's my shtick. That's something I do. I would love to get better at just yanking those 20 pages before I start shooting, because it's always a bit of an awkward.
For me, that's always in the first act.
Is it? And then you have, okay. And do you ever pull it out before you shoot? Have you ever been smart enough to do that, or no?
Not so far. Not so far. It's at the rough cut stage.
I've got a long road ahead of me then. But yeah, I think there's rewriting in the editing room, and I've just been really lucky to work with incredibly skilled editors who have very distinctive voices. I mean, the 3 films I directed all had different editors, and their voice is very strong in that film as much as mine is. And I think they would be totally different films with different editors, just in terms of tone and everything. And I think with each film, I leave the editor alone more. I'm just noticing the more I'm away, the more they have the freedom to bring their voice to it, and I'm able to see things more clearly. Yeah, with Stories We Tell, it was so intense and so close to me that I actually, you know, signed up to like the academic bridging program at U of T to qualify for first-year university, just to get myself out of the editing room so Mike Munn could do his job. And it was like, once I was enrolled at U of T and I was literally gone for 2 or 3 days a week, I feel like that film started to become something I was proud of, but that was his work and it was his eye.
I find the greatest thing about picture editors is that they are in no way attached to all of the images you had in your mind when you were writing.
Yeah.
They have no emotional attachment to what you meant to do. They only know what the footage is.
Yeah.
Emily Drake is asking, if it's being in a piece of literature that you love, then what's the hook for you? What tells you that a piece will work as a piece of motion picture?
Hi, Emily. First of all, hello. I love that, Emily Drake. I think I just know, I just want to see it. I immediately know this is a film I have to see. and I can hear actors saying the words, and I can see specific actors' faces right away. And a lot of it becomes about the motivation to see that actor play that part. So yeah, I think it's like a very instinctual, strong feeling. It doesn't require thought.
Ari Simha is wondering about writing from historical events. How do you handle the challenge and responsibility to faithfully represent real events, and the need and desire to make the narrative and film more engrossing to moviegoers? I guess that's a balance question between historicity, I pronounced that wrong, I apologize, faithfulness to history, and entertainment.
I side with history. I think history is generally more interesting than creating more momentum, and also becomes a record. It becomes a record for, if we're lucky, 50 or 100 years from now, someone might come across this film, and this might become a definitive document for them of what that history is. So I feel like a very strong responsibility to history. And with Alias Grace, I involved historians in the process, and Margaret Atwood was incredibly rigorous in her research and shared that research with me. So yeah, I would generally, if I was making something historical, be in it for the history as much as for the film. Like that would be part of what would be really most fascinating to me. So I never actually understand the taking of liberties with that stuff. I always think the reasons for doing so are always a bit boring.
And Ari's follow-up question is, how deep into the weeds do you get when you're doing historical research?
I do a lot of, again, have I done anything else historical? No, I've done Alias Grace. So I get, with that, very deep into the weeds, but everyone on that project was equally committed to the history of it. So, obviously we were drawing on Margaret's resources a lot of the time. I also made some contacts with people in terms of Irish history and that period of Canadian history. The history of domestic servants in that time frame, especially from Ireland. So yeah, pretty deep in the weeds, but so did the art department, and so did Mary Herron, and so did everybody else sort of, embraced that process. Like Arv Gould was our production designer, who went incredibly, his department was like, a PhD department basically in that period of history. They were getting things from museums all over North America as props. Like it was an incredible process.
I would like you to know that Hey Lady was really fun.
Thank you.
I agree.
Sure.
I watched it the other night. Super fun. Everyone should watch it. Well, thank you for letting me ask you questions about writing for the first 30 minutes of our chat, because I feel like we all have a lot to learn from you.
Thank you.
But it's a DGC event, so we'll probably talk about directing at some point, and this is that point. So anonymous attendee has an interesting question about it, which is, were there any lessons you learned from the directors that directed you as an actor, either consciously or subconsciously, that you realized you could apply once you started directing?
Yeah, it's funny. When I was sort of mentally preparing for this session, that was what came to me the most, was the advice I was given when I was starting to direct myself, and I went to so many filmmakers I'd worked with to ask, what's your one piece of advice? But then also having the privilege of getting to witness so many filmmakers before making one of my own, which isn't an experience a lot of filmmakers get to have. I realize it's such a lucky thing to get how differently people work and how there isn't a right way. And I feel like a lot of filmmakers come into making films trying to figure out how to make a film. And as an actor, what you realize is there is just not a way. And the most lost filmmaker in the world can make the most brilliant film, and the most on it, type A together filmmaker can actually be making something that lacks substance. And there's not one way to have a process. And I've worked on films with terrible scripts that have turned into great movies, and I've worked on movies with great scripts that have turned into terrible movies. And it is so much in the filmmaker's hands in so many ways. So some of the things that I remembered that were said to me that I loved were, at the end of every day of prep, before you leave the office, go to each department and say, is there anything you need from me today? Because 9 times out of 10, there are a few unanswered questions that will keep that person up at night, and it'll gum up their next day. And if you can get that off their plate, that time with you in prep, which is so busy, it goes a long way to alleviate it. And these are just very practical, like, you know, nitty gritty things, but I think they're more important. Like the way you collaborate to me is so much more important than any other piece of the puzzle. For me, it has been anyway. Someone else said, make sure at the end of every shooting day, you say thank you to every single person. So I can't say I've always done this, but I've sort of tried, you know, as much as possible. I've tried to make that just part of your practice, that you actually acknowledge that people are working extremely hard, many cases harder than you are, for something that's, you know, your baby and your dream, and that's an enormous privilege, and there's some gratitude expressed for that. I was told you're a goalie and people are going to keep shooting the puck at you, and your job is you just have to keep stopping the puck. And if you let, you know, if you bemoan the puck that just went in, you're not going to be able to stop the next puck. Then I once talked to Ken Dryden, who made that like an even bigger analogy about like life and parenting, and not focusing on periods, but focusing on the whole game. It's really, I really like the hockey metaphors around this stuff. I was told I remember Catherine Bigelow said, as a female filmmaker, you have to be like a dog with a bone, and everyone is going to try to take that bone away from you, and you just have to hold on to the bone. And that ended up being extremely useful advice. Isabelle Coixet said to me, I love this. You have to choose something to not care at all about, because you can't care about everything equally. Like, it's just, your brain won't be able to contain it. Your stress level won't be able to contain it. So you have to choose a few things to be able to completely let go. And what I found as a compliment to that is, make sure you hire someone in those departments that cares a lot. Because I've definitely had the experience of deciding to not care about a certain thing, and then it hasn't been compensated for. So you have to make sure that, you know, whoever you've hired cares a lot, and is meticulous. But here's the thing, sorry, there's a long answer, but I'm just gonna keep going with this, because I think there's probably the most I have to offer is the answer to this question. And I worked with a lot of really different filmmakers as an actor. You know, I worked with Adam Egoyan, I worked with Doug Liman, I worked with Terry Gilliam, I worked with Isabelle Coixet and Catherine Bigelow and Wim Wenders. And I see no benefit, like the people I worked with, and I haven't named them in that list actually, although, you know, Terry's problematic, let's face it. But I haven't named like the ones who are real jerks. But what I will say is, they don't gain anything through their jerkhood. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing to be gained from being that macho, like difficult, you know, child that, you know, is what we've all come to accept in our industry as being okay as a director. And now that's changing, and I'm noticing people are getting fired for being jerks and abusive to crews, but those people are not any more talented than the people who are calm and gentle and incredibly organized and prepared and don't waste a crew's time. I don't see a different in talent. I only see a different in choice in terms of how to live a life. So one of the things I loved, you know, from Adam is he's just so meticulously prepared. And Wim Wenders as well. And I remember thinking, oh my God, the reason I'm, you know, running around clutching my shot list, you know, is because I'm so inexperienced and insecure. But actually, Wim Wenders walks around clutching his shot list too. You know, like I realized there's some things that aren't about, that I thought were about my inexperience. It's actually just about being conscientious and, you know, wanting to respect people's time, which isn't to say everyone has to shot list everything meticulously. I mean, in Stories We Tell, everything was kind of grabbed and it was much more improvised when we did the recreations. So it's not like I believe in one process, but I think there's a way of trying, and again, I'm sure I've failed at times with this, but of trying really hard to be collaborative and a decent human and still make a film. And it's crazy to even have to say that, but it actually needs to be said, because so many people walk onto a set playing a director. It's like they're taking up more space with their performance than any of the actors playing what they think a director is like. And when you told me the other day that, you know, you'd never been on a film set when we made Hanging Garden and you didn't know anything, you seemed so calm. Like, you were so calm and gentle, which I just associate with total confidence. Like, to me, that means somebody is not trying to prove themselves. I love that. And I said to you, why were you so calm? And you were like, I don't know, like I didn't, what did you say? You were like, you didn't know any better than to be calm. You didn't know
I
this
was
state.
supposed to be calm, yeah. I had never met any mean people on film sets, so I didn't know that was a thing.
It was amazing. You were so calm, and it was your first film. And I just feel like every other filmmaker I've worked with, when it's their first film especially, there's a lot of compensating happening. And it sort of just exhausts everybody, that kind of energy of needing to prove you're in charge and the boss. And, you know,
Well, I wouldn't say you're not macho. You're a little bit macho.
I'm a little bit macho.
Also, quite a wise ass. Something that I learned from, I wrote down a few things I learned from you about directing over the years. On the event, I think every director knows early on you're not supposed to give line readings to actors. And I knew that, but I didn't yet know not to sort of walk the actors blocking to make a change.
Oh no.
And I wanted to make an adjustment.
I was a horrible teenager, so I know this is going to be terrible. Okay, go.
No. So you had done a take and I wanted you to make a change. And so I walked your path and I said, well, go a little faster here. And then could you stop here to let the focus puller catch up with you before moving on? And you said, well, did it look like that when I do it? Do I look as stupid as you just did? I thought, okay,
Damn.
that's the last time I'm going to walk the.
Okay, I just want to apologize for myself basically before the age of 25. I had some redeeming qualities, but I was also like a little brat. So
you were a little brat.
Sure,
But this is a bit of a 20-year delayed answer, but the answer is no, you never look as stupid as I do. So
okay. Really good to know, except you have those plates behind you and they're so pretty.
Alison Cute, wonderful Potter. So a question about directing from Vanessa Shah. How much do you rely on your director of photography when shooting? Your connection, your professional relationship, how important is it to you that you have the same aesthetic?
So I learned so much of what I know about filmmaking from Luc Montpellier. I was super lucky on my, I'd made shorts with Luc before. And when I started working with Luc, he didn't just teach me everything I know visually, he made me feel like I knew everything. Like he had this incredible ability to make me feel like I had, this enormous part of my brain that was there that I just didn't believe in. And I don't actually think that was true. I think he slowly pulled that out of me and helped me develop that. He's an incredibly egoless person. And for him, his process has always been, what is the right aesthetic for this film? So it's never about what he would like to impose on a film. It's about how do I draw, and our process has become more and more complicated. Like we're prepping something now, or we were prepping something from the summer that obviously isn't happening, but we've gotten to the point where we now will spend hours talking about each scene and what it means for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, because he wants to know what the intention is on every level. And then he'll sort of go with images that you're bringing or that he's finding, and we'll sort of build it based on that. But it never is about one aesthetic, and it's always about honoring the film. And for me, that collaboration has been essential. And I don't feel like pretending it's not. I don't feel like pretending I came up with all this on my own, and that like I don't rely heavily on my DOP and my production designer and my first AD Dan Murphy, who I'd be useless without. I just feel like this whole artifice that the auteur is just so absurd. Like we're so dependent on extremely talented people. I mean, this pandemic has been humbling in terms of trying to do movies with my kids, because it turns out I have no skills. And it's, if I didn't know it before, I really know it now. But you're just, I just think I'm hoping that with what we've seen in terms of the shift in what is expected in terms of behavior on a film set, and it's a slow shift, I know it hasn't happened yet. I'm hoping one of the things we can let go of is the idea that this is not an intensely collaborative art form where we're totally dependent on other people's talent. So with Luc, yeah, I'm totally dependent on him. With Stories We Tell, with Iris Ng shot that, and I had seen a short film that Iris made about her family, like a tiny little short. It was so beautiful, and I realized there's a tone to that that I need to learn about from her. And so, you know, her voice was equally important in Stories We Tell, and, you know, it changed my way of working there. So for me, the relationship with the DOP is giant, equally with a first AD. And I was very lucky to start working with Dan and Luke. You know, I was 27 when I made Away from Her, and I was so nervous and so apologetic for myself being there. And Dan started this thing where he just started calling me boss. And it was so weird. And I realized at some point he was calling me boss because he saw me. I mean, I'm reading into this. He would probably deny all of this. But my gut was, I was sort of projecting this like actress, I don't deserve to be here thing. And he kept going, we're elevating you here. You're a boss. Like, we're calling you boss. Like, and there was just this immediate respect and confidence in someone who actually didn't have that much experience, and probably I didn't know what I was doing. But that was in a time where, you know, a lot of men were not making people feel like that on film sets. I was so lucky that, you know, my first crew on Away from Her, everyone was so supportive and helpful. The grips watched dailies every day in the grip truck. Like, everyone was so invested. And so for me, it's like, I just wouldn't have wanted to do it again if it had been miserable. I mean, I never cared enough about making films that I would want to like slog through hell, but it was worth it for the art. I mean, I'm really happy doing other things.
Adam Agoyan has chimed in, don't feel bad, Tom. She told me I look stupid too.
Okay, it's really unfair. I don't know why I agreed to do this. It's true, I was so awful. I'm sure he's the worst thing to Adam, and he was so nice.
I also worked with Luke a couple of years ago, Montpellier, your cinematographer, and one of the things we did, what I really wanted, was to have him participate in the blocking of the scene, not just sort of watch, but because it was based on a stage play, I really wanted to be able to do long takes where the camera sort of moved in concert and choreography with the actors. So they really couldn't block the scene without Luke being part of it, which brings me to my next question, is about your on-set process. How much do you block and rehearse? How much? What's your real order of things? And John has also asked, how organized and prepared are you as a director when you get to sets, and how much do you let things develop organically when you're shooting?
Stories We Tell was the exception to the rule. Stories We Tell was something where I literally went to the actors. I would say to Rebecca Jenkins, okay, this is the scene. It's like a family dinner scene. This is sort of what's happening. I'm going into the next room. Go do it. Like, I don't even want to watch it in case I try to control something. Because I trusted them so completely. And I also worried about, I am a very controlling person and I have a lot of ideas. And I really wanted to step out of it. And I think those recreations would not have actually felt like real footage if I had directed them. So I sometimes had little additions, but it was mostly Iris playing the character of my dad filming things and the actors having complete ownership, and I didn't script a thing. I mean, it was silent, but the sound was so amazing that it made me realize I would like to make a film like that one day, where we really do give the actors that much agency, because just watching Rebecca and the other actors do those improvisations was so beyond what I could have written. But in general, super prepared. I have like a book that I give to every crew member on the Tech Scout that has the script, the shot list for the whole film, the schedule, and all storyboards. So when we're going to each location, I can walk them through every single direction we'll be looking in, every single size. That's been really good and bad. Like, it's, you know, there's a cost to it. I think that I'm very anxious about wasting people's time. That comes from growing up as a child on film sets. I was very close to crews. I knew a lot about how they perceived things and certain directors. I knew a lot about what made them unhappy. And they were the only people who really stood up for me and protected me. So my loyalty was utterly and completely to the crew and never to the director and producers until I was older. I mean, that's still sort of how I feel when I'm on a set. I think I ended up having better experiences with directors as I got older, so I had more respect later. But I feel like there's a certain neurotic energy to it as well, where it's like, if I see something I want to capture, I have to push myself to capture it, because if it's not in the plan, I don't want anybody to think I'm flaking out on them or I'm going to make them late for dinner. And, again, it's good and bad. I think it's good to have that conscientiousness. I also don't want to miss moments because of it. Take This Waltz, I think I got a little bit better at like those moments of capturing things and letting the actors go and improvise a little bit more and capture footage. And then Chris Donaldson would kind of like put it together in a way I didn't expect. So there was a bit of a looser feel for that. But I think it depends on the film. Like the next one I'm making, I mean, there's two that I'm working on right now, and one is extremely loose and sort of takes the lessons I learned from Stories We Tell, and I'm having the actors create their own characters, and a lot of it will be improvised. And another one I'm doing, which is extremely constructed. That's the one that Luke and I have been sitting for weeks and weeks before the pandemic happened, figuring out every single frame. But I think you get a lot of goodwill by at least showing that you're not being lazy. That if it's that you're capturing things, you have a plan of how to capture it, and you're very open about that. The sort of thing of, I think it depends. Again, I think I've lost some good creative moments because of that. But at the same time, I don't want to lose it completely.
You just touched on number 2 on my list of things I learned from Sarah Polley as a director, which is to respect a child's time.
Oh.
That children who work aren't really just bartering their time for money like an adult is. That they're actually sort of giving up part of their childhood to be there at work, and that makes their time actually more valuable than everybody else on set. So I have a chat with the assistant directors in prep and say, just because you can bring in a child for 8 hours, please don't bring in the child for 8 hours if it's not necessary. Like the last thing any kid needs is to sit around for 4 hours on set, and you do that with a grown-up because you're paying them for the 8-hour day, even if you only need them for 2 hours. And I always, because I sort of got to watch you interacting with children on set a lot behind the scenes, not in front of the camera, and sort of you reminded me that these are actually children, and that their time is more valuable than anybody else's. So
yeah, I'm so
put that out there. An interesting question is from Andrew. Do you have any rituals that you use to bond and unite the cast and crew? For example, Francis Ford Coppola gets everyone to hold hands and chant "Pua Ba" 3 times.
So weird. I completely independently came up with that. That's exactly what I do. It's so weird. I don't. No, I don't.
All right.
Yeah, I think I associated it with the only people I saw do that were like super macho dudes. So I'm sure there's a way of doing it that's not really obnoxious, but sort of imposing that kind of thing on a group of people feels presumptuous or something. I remember one guy used to do this thing with like blowing incense with like just the dudes. He would come in with like incense and he would gather the dudes around, and all the one would stand outside the circle and they'd blow incense around their noses. And I mean, these were the kinds of things that just happen every day on a film set. So I think I associated those rituals. But I know that Mira Nair has a yoga class for her crew every morning before starting, and it's optional. But I think that sounds amazing, just because I think, the hours people are expected to work and how intensely people are expected to work, and the fact that we have this emergency room mentality on film sets, which we feel is necessary, is kind of nice to offer something to offset that. So I feel like I would love to do something like that.
On my films, just being so low budget has sometimes been very bonding. I actually vividly remember a moment where you had staked out a twin bed in a bedroom and a location to have a nap, and I went to find you, and Don McKellar and Olympia Dukakis and Parker Posey were all napping with you in the same twin bed. And I thought, well, they seem very bonded at this point.
So normal. We were very bonded. It was a very bonded cast.
Seemed like a real family. Allison Reed is asking, how do you choose your director on projects you've written, but you choose not to direct yourself? Do you have an idea when you want to do it from their previous work, or is it, the way that director relates to the material? What qualities are important to you in choosing a director?
Hi, Allison. I've known Allison since I was also very young, and we know each other from Road to Avonlea originally, and she is now an incredible director. Um, I, um, I think for me, I mean, I've only done it once with Alias Grace. And for me, first of all, I loved Mary Herron's work. I was a huge fan of her work. But I had actually, when I was an actor, when I was a lot younger, I think I was 20, had wanted to be in a film she was making. And the part I was meeting her about was the kind of part I always met directors about, which was, she was sort of, an innocent and winsome, and she was, coming into this world, and she was kind of intellectual, and it was, what I'd always played, and I wanted to do it just because I wanted to work with Mary. And halfway through the conversation, I started talking very abstractly and not thinking of myself at all because it made no sense. There was another character who was this completely out of control, written as based on someone real, actually. She was giant, out of control, absolute waste case mess, screaming banshee of a person who was, again, was like a giant physically. And I was just saying, oh my God, I love that part so much. Who are you thinking of for that part? It's so great. But I was sort of in the conversation kind of now committed to playing this other part. And she went, oh, do you really love that part? And I said, yeah. And she went, maybe you should play that then. And I just remember just the trust in that, and the imagination and the daring and the risk of casting me so against type that it didn't even line up with who it was, but that she just could see if someone's this passionate and if I trust them as an artist, they're going to be able to do it. That was just, I just never forgot it, like that act of imagination and trust. And so I loved Mary Herron's films. I'd always looked up to her. She'd always been super supportive of me and my career in a really incredibly helpful way. And so just based on her being kind of a mentor and looking up to her, and then also knowing that that's how she would approach the casting and the making of Alias Grace, that there would be a taking of a risk that maybe I wouldn't take myself. And I think, there was just a moment with Alias Grace where I was like, I would love to make this when in 10 years, when I've made way more stuff, but I'm not at the point yet where I can make something on this scale. And I'll get there, but I'm not there now. And I didn't want to take a risk with Alias Grace that it wouldn't work out because of my lack of experience. And a lot of people say, oh, that's so female, like any man would have just done it. And it's like, yeah, that's okay. Like, it's okay to like know your limitations. I think that's fine. I mean, I feel like I've turned down a lot of parts because I knew I would be bad at those parts, or I could even think of the person who was better and recommend them. Like, I don't think there's any shame in knowing where you're at. And I have no doubt I could get there. I just wasn't there yet. So I was really happy to be able to hand that over to someone I respected that much.
Ingrid V has a very process-oriented question. Is your editor assembling as you go? And are you watching the footage at the end of each day? Have you reshot scenes? And if so, specifically when and why?
Yes, I have editors assembling. Hi, Ingrid, by the way. I think that's Ingrid Benninger, but I'm not sure. Hi. I do have, absolutely, I'm watching footage as we go through at probably every night, yes. I haven't done reshoots. I'm allergic to reshoots. I don't know what it is. It's like I need to get it out, and then I need to fix the problems in the editing room. I don't love reshooting. I've always hated it as an actor. I've always felt whatever we've done has not been very good, or it's been okay, but out of step with whatever the energy was of the rest of the process. So I think I need to get less allergic to reshoots. I think some films could have benefited from a reshoot or two, but to be honest with you, I'm not working with budgets that have a lot of room for reshoots. Like, I don't work on films where anybody is budgeted for 2 or 3 reshoot days. Like, that just doesn't exist with small scale films in Canada. So I think it would be wise to budget for a few reshoot days in the future. I think I could have made real improvements on films, but I do also have a worry that there'll be something that will kind of work, but be out of step in a way we can't name. I feel like that's sort of an amateurish answer, but there we go.
Not at all. I don't know if that was just a question about like reshooting after the fact, but even sort of within the shoot schedule, where you might have botched a scene and sort of just picked it up a couple of days later? I mean, I do it. It's okay that it's good that
I
you have.
think once I did when an actor had a really off day, like it was like a brilliant actor who didn't really have off days, and they just had one day that was really hard personally, and it just felt like unfair to them to not reshoot that one. So I think I've done it with a couple of scenes, but I think that's it.
Yeah, it is that kind of thing. I shot a scene that it was just outside, and it's Nova Scotia in June, so naturally the actors were shivering and you could see their breath.
Which film is that? Which film is that?
That was Cloudburst, and it was Olympia.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
So we did it again in July. It turned out much better. Anyway, I think it's being a little bit limber in terms of, and exactly that, giving an actor sometimes a second chance can really make a difference.
Yeah, I need to do that more. That's something I could get better at. Note to self.
Sarah, you're teaching us how to do things, not the other way around. So Rachel's asking how involved you get into post-production, particularly with composition score as part of the storytelling.
Sorry, I'm looking for that thing. How involved do I get in post? Like very. I mean, I think, yeah, and maybe too much so. I mean, I do think with the editing room, again, like learning to step back has been huge for me. I was there every second in my first film, a tiny bit less with my second film, and a lot less with my third film. And I feel like for me, I can see the progress of an editor being given some room. Now, my first film was edited by my husband at the time, so he could just demand the space every now and then, and he was able to bring himself to it just because he was like, "You're not coming in today. Guess what? You're staying home because you're gonna be." And then it was always good to take that space. But I got better at doing it voluntarily. In terms of score, Jonathan Goldsmith is the composer I always work with, and the last film he did of mine, he was writing stuff from before we started shooting, like from the script stage. So we had actual music to assemble with, which was kind of great. Where'd you go? It was so mysterious.
The neighbor started weed whacking, so I thought I should close the window.
It's weird. I've been wondering too, when we're going to start hearing the shrieks of children, I'm going to have to like turn the camera off.
I've been very well behaved. She's got 3 children in the house.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. Hope nothing's happened to them. So super involved, and I love the sound edit, and I love the sound mix, and I always do my stuff at Tattersall with different combinations of people, but usually Lou Solikovsky, Dave McCallum, Jane Tattersall, sometimes David Rose. I've worked with other people there as well who are all amazing. And I love that part of the process so much. I love those tiny details in the mix and in the sound edit that completely change a scene. I remember the first time I noticed what sound was I was in a film called The Claim. And there's this moment, oh my God, it's so weird, but this moment is actually about, there's a moment in the film where I find out someone is my real father. I did act this out, actually. I acted this in a movie. I find out this guy is my real father, and that the person I thought was my father wasn't my father. And I have this emotional reaction, and I turn, and something happens, like a vase pings or something as I turn. And it didn't actually happen on the day, but whatever the emotional moment I was acting was 10 times better because of this weird ping of this vase as I left. Like it was sort of jarring, and it was like you suddenly just felt what my character was feeling. And it just, the power of the tiniest details of sound to completely alter a performance or a moment or a mood is just astonishing to me. So I love that part of the process. I find it so magical.
Pinging vase like it's fragile and might break. Yeah. Nice. Eric is asking, how have you managed to navigate the sharks and wolves in the industry and stay so grounded, upright, and classy? He must not know you very well. How have you learned since your childhood years in the industry that helped you put together your cruise today?
Sorry, can you, so sorry, how did I put together my cruise today and navigate the sharks in the industry? Yeah.
How do you avoid putting sharks in your cruise?
Yeah, it's not always easy. And I think I made a bunch of shorts before I made my films. And one thing I learned is that, you know, it's so hard to know how to put this. Some people are much more comfortable with you as an actress than they are as a female director. So I learned that really quickly, that it wasn't necessarily like my favorite people who I worked with as a child on film sets were going to be the best collaborators as an adult. You know, like there was going to always be something paternalistic in that relationship, and that wasn't, and actually Luke helped me identify that. Like I'd be like, what about this person? What about this person? And he would be like, we're not bringing on anyone you knew when you were 8 because I need them to think of you as an adult. I can't, like, I need them to be respecting you and not like having you be their kid. So that was an interesting learning curve for me too, that other people sort of pointed out to me. And I definitely felt a kind of, in some of moments, I made quite a few shorts. So, you know, there were definitely moments in some of those shorts where I felt a condescension or a, you don't know what you're doing feeling, which was, again, I didn't know what I was doing, but that's okay. That's how people learn stuff. That shouldn't be a problem. But I think once you start to find 1 or 2 people you can really trust who are great collaborators, they kind of lead you to the other ones. Like, I think then it's a snowball. It's like, you're just so lucky to find that first person, and that first person is going to lead you to a second person. And you just slowly build your team through people, I think, that you can trust. And especially like as a woman, I think you do have to be really conscious that, you know, I've had big fights, like, you know, with male filmmakers who I love, who will say, you know, that guy's such an amazing AD. He's so great. And you're like, no, he's a chauvinist douchebag. He's nice to you because you're a guy. And they'll be like, well, you know, he's got a great marriage. Like, you do, I mean, I do feel like you have to be aware of different things. And I've been extraordinarily lucky that I think since I started making my first feature, I'd found my way through that a little bit, to find, you know, people I could trust more. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that it's not always successful. I mean, I've certainly had my share of sharks around, but mostly as an actor, I would say, in those first years trying to make films. In the
How to Direct Episodic Television workshop the DGC had last week, one of the panelists pointed out that since 1 in 100 persons is a psychopath, there's a pretty good chance that someone working on your film is a psychopath. So, well,
the ratio's way higher in film. I'm sorry. It's not an industry that attracts people who are not sociopaths.
Could be. We have a question from Chris Mutton, and it goes, I've noticed that you, in your films, especially your earlier films, you cast actors that you had worked with before as an actor and clearly felt some sort of bond with. Chris's question is, do you utilize test screenings? And okay, I totally misinterpreted his question. So we'll stick with his question for now. Do you utilize test screenings? And if so, do you involve close friends and colleagues or people outside the world of film to get feedback on your cuts? So I've never done a formal test screening. I was lucky enough to make films where that wasn't a given that you would do that in the time. Now, apparently it's basically impossible to avoid test screening. So I dread going back into that because I've seen films I've been in as an actor test and just get worse based on editing to test results. So I'm dreading that part of the process, and I hope I can avoid it. But I do show it to a lot of people, and most of them are not in film. So the people I will generally include so I'll show many times, like rough cut, fine cut, like I'll do a few different screenings of each cut to small groups of people, generally not in film. People who I think, you know, have an interesting viewpoint.
some of whom I know well, some of whom I don't know well at all. I'll ask people to recommend people. The only thing that I definitely do at some point is an editor's screening where I invite like 5 to 10 editors to just go nuts. And I think you don't just get criticism there, you kind of get solution-based criticism. So you're not just getting like, the claws of the film industry at you, or people who are so sort of in the film industry that they can't see like a normal person anymore, but you get people who are incredibly skilled. And I find editors really love that too. Like I generally just ask the editor to invite their editors that they're closest to and that they trust the most. And you always make sure you have someone who makes you uncomfortable in the room. You always have somebody difficult.
It sounds like a brilliant strategy and also a little bit scary. Yeah.
I think the editor is always like a bit terrified before that screening, but David Warnsby started it with my first film with Away From Her. He started it. It was his idea, and it's just an amazing idea. And it's, it takes a lot of humility, I think, for an editor to open themselves up like that. But I do think you can make a film so much better with getting people who have that level of skill and craft, and who generally have such goodwill. Like there is a great community in Toronto, especially among post people. I hate to say it, but I like post people so much more than production people. And they're always so good at giving notes. And having like also, I always want the sound team to see it at a certain point and give notes before we've locked picture, because I feel like, again, they're seeing things through a different lens. And the people I work with at Tattersall are just super smart when it comes to story. And so, yeah.
Well, David must be a real glutton for punishment. And Chris Mutton is an editor. He'd like to be invited to your editor screenings if that's okay.
Awesome.
So I had started. I misinterpreted that question. He said test screenings, and I thought like test shooting, like
right.
auditions. And
but like public screening, like public test screening, I think it's really hard to interpret what people really mean from those questionnaires and surveys. Like what I like about the small screenings with people who are not in film is being able to drill down into what did they mean. And because sometimes people will be pointing to a problem, but it's actually something that happened in 3 scenes before where they think it happened. Do you know what I mean? Like when you drill down into, this felt awkward, I didn't believe this because, this wasn't earned, because right before that she said that. When you really drill down and you realize, no, the problem's actually bigger than that, or it's smaller than that, and we can fix it this way. I just think not being able to have a really intense conversation that lasts, frankly, hours to figure out what the problems are it just feels a bit superficial to me. But again, I've never been through the process. I've only witnessed it and have real doubts about it. Unless you're making a big commercial movie, in which case, like, fill your boots. Like, I'm just not going to make a movie that people see.
Those screenings can be helpful because people sort of have, if they have an opportunity to actually write long form their thoughts, as opposed to a lot of times it's sort of a Q&A, multiple choice, or
it's just not,
it's things that producers or distributors are concerned about, and they're trying to lead the audience in a certain way.
But this whole thing of like sympathetic character, this whole thing of a sympathetic character is problematic in itself, right? All of us are somewhat sympathetic and very unsympathetic, and I think there's this sort of unstated understanding that we need to make everybody more likable. I just don't think we can see ourselves in people that are totally likable. I think that's a problem.
But I do want to ask you about casting, since working with actors is something you are so amazing at. So how do you approach casting? I started by saying earlier, you in your early films cast a lot of actors that you knew because you worked with them as an actor. And I guess over time, that hasn't always been true. You started to work with people you don't know. How do you make those difficult decisions?
It's kind of varied. With Away From Her, one of the guiding motivations was I read that short story and I wanted to see Julie play that part. And I had just worked with Julie on 2 other films and we were friends, and I just wanted to see her play that part. So for me, that was the guiding, and I always saw Gordon in it, and I always saw Olympia in it. I'd never seen other people in those parts. I wrote the part for Kristen Thompson. Christy, the nurse, is a combination of a few characters, and I added a bunch of stuff for Kristen Thompson. And for me, with that, it wasn't like, they were there for me, and that was like very obvious. I think a huge part of my casting process is my brother, John Buchan. So he's, from the very beginning, the person who reads the script first. So we have those conversations about casting from that first draft.
For those who don't know, Sarah's brother John is one of the eminent casting directors in the country.
He's not just like my brother lives in my basement, who I'm always asking for. I just always ask Johnny in the basement. Yeah, Johnny is, he's got this crazy mind for casting where, a lot of people just have their lists of everybody who would be good for a certain kind of part, and they kind of work their way through their list. And Johnny has those lists, but then he and his partner, Jason Knight, who's also brilliant, Johnny will just call it weird hours and go, I just thought of the craziest idea. That really dramatic part, what if Sarah Silverman did that? And she'd never done a dramatic role, but we were obsessed with Sarah Silverman. And, he has these ideas that are really outside the box. So for me, that's a really key part of the process really early on with the script stage, is involving Johnny in those conversations. And then for me, it's the most important thing. I mean, there have been films I was going to direct that I have not directed because the actor I saw in it didn't want to play the part. And I left the film behind. I was not going to make another version of that film. And it didn't make sense to me to do it. It's so important to me. I mean, I can't emphasize enough. And I think because it's so important, I feel like my main advice, and I realize half the people participating in this chat are far more experienced than I am. So I frame this whole thing as an advice column, but actually it's quite embarrassing. But I feel for people who aren't as experienced, I think going for broke with the actors you want is super important. So a personal letter, becoming really friendly with that agent, letting them know at every stage where you're at, somehow walking the line between not harassing them. And then I think with an actor, for Take This Waltz with Seth Rogen, who was the busiest man ever at that point, but I knew I wanted him for that part. I just said, I know you're busy. He was in the middle of the Green Hornet. There was no way he was going to have time to read the script or do anything. And I just said, I'll come to wherever you are at any time. Just let me know. And I'll, I'm in LA right now. Can I meet you for lunch anywhere? So I literally met him in his trailer on the set of the Green Hornet. And it was again, I was super lucky to be able to do that. I mean, that's super privileged to have had that connection, to be able to even have that conversation with that agent and manager, who were also super supportive of me trying to get in touch with him. But I do think you have to do the furthest thing you can possibly do before giving up. If it's somebody who's going to make or break your film, I think you have to be, that's the moment where I think you have to be unapologetic about how passionate you are and how much you're willing to show how passionate you are. Because I also think people walk into a project with people having faith in them in that way. It makes a huge difference. That's with Adam Egoyan, in the time that I worked with him, he didn't really read people for parts. You just got offered a part. And for me, it was so crazy with Exotica because I'd just done Avonlea and no one was casting me in movies. But when you begin a project with someone having offered you something, you do really much better work because you feel trusted. It's an amazing feeling. At the same time, I think you can discover people by reading that you would have never known about. So I feel Johnny is always encouraging me, you have to read people because you actually don't know what that actor can do. They might be able to, that person you've decided can't play that part might be the best. And he's been proven right a few times. So there's ways to go about it. But if there's one actor that you see in your mind that you have to have, I just think it's worth not stopping at anything to get them.
I'm glad we touched on that because we didn't touch on it when we were talking about writing. And it fascinates me that you so much have a particular actor in mind when you are writing.
Yeah. I mean,
attached.
I guess with Away From Her, it was more, and again, it's because Johnny had read the short story too from early on. With Take This Waltz, it was much more a process of discovery, I think. And I did read a lot of people and, got to know the character that way. Again, I've only made 2 films. In a way, you don't really know what your process is when you've only made 2 films because it'll change in the next one and, we shall see.
I promise not to ask you about the next one.
Okay.
I also fly around the world to meet the actors, and both to convince them to do a film, but also to feel confident myself that there's a shared vision, that that there's something we can stand on the same ground about the part and the approach before we get flung into the mayhem. And it seems like a really, really important part of the casting process. And I always regret.
I just feel so sorry for you that you came all that way. I had that happen as an actor before, where I was like, came all this way, not do a movie.
Nice. Mohammed is asking, since you started as an actor, do you think that your strength as a director is in knowing how to deal with your cast and direct them?
I actually think it might weirdly have been a disadvantage, and I know that sounds like I'm making that up, but I actually think that was something I had to overcome, was how self-conscious I was about how I communicated, because I knew so well so many of the pitfalls that directors can fall into when they speak to an actor, and how easily you can throw an actor off in the way you direct them. So I actually think it took me a long time to not just be a nervous wreck when I was talking to actors, and they could sense that, and it wasn't a great feeling. I think one thing I learned is to just talk less, that it's really hard in between takes to take in more than one note. I think it's almost impossible. And I'm pretty neurotic, and I would see everything that needed to, I'd give all the notes after the first take, and you just sort of see a kind of confusion descend upon people. And I remembered what it was like when directors would monologue at me. Like, they'd come up and they'd talk about the scene, and you can take in very little if you're also supposed to be in the subjective state of being a character. So just learning to breathe, one adjustment per take. And I think maybe where it was an advantage was just being aware of how safe they were feeling, how comfortable they were feeling. I think it's a really good idea to check in the makeup and hair room every morning before actors get to set, because I think you get a really good sense of the vibe in there of what's happening. And I think the makeup and hair team appreciates like having a little bit more contact with the director outside of the mayhem. And I think those relationships and their dynamic with the actors is so kind of mysterious. There's an alchemy to it, and you just kind of want to be a friendly presence in there and feel like you're available. And again, if inevitably someone has a question for you in there that if you don't get to them before they get to you, they're going to come to you in a ball of anxiety. So it's just nice to kind of like say hi before the intensity of the set is there. And again, these are all things I learned from other directors, like doing when I was an actor, I think.
So you've mentioned that now you've said you like to make visits to the departments first thing in the morning, and also again at the end.
No, I just make it. I'm starting to seem like a stalker. Like the production heads are just trying to avoid me at all costs. Here she comes, trying to see if we need anything. We're good.
What do you consider really your most important tasks as a director? What would you impart to everybody else in terms of like, what's your priority on set during a day? I stumped you.
Well, two things come to mind. The first thing is actually something Luke always says when he can tell I'm kind of like giving up on something, or we're just not getting it, and I'll want to move on. He'll go, never leave a shot behind. Don't leave it behind. And that's always sort of in my brain. There's something that Jacco van der Mel said to me when I worked with him, and he's one of the most decent, amazing, nurturing human beings I've ever known. And he's also a genius, and one of the many people like him, like Adam, like yourself, who prove you don't have to be a jerk to do this job really well. But he said, the hours we were working on his film were so short, and everyone had their kids around, and every Friday another department was in charge of a party. So like when the art department did it, was like all these set pieces, and it was just this amazing environment. And people were so respected and felt so taken care of. And there was such kindness and everything. And I was asking him about that process and how much energy that took from him to create that environment. And he said, you know, if this film is as good as we want it to be and everything we imagine it to be, it may affect a few people for a little while. The only thing we can be certain of is that the experience of making this film together will be with all of us always. So it can't be bad. Like, we have to really focus on our experience of it. And I feel like that feels to me like a great guiding principle, that, you know, it's not okay to just have a miserable process, but, oh, you end up with a great work of art, so it was worth it. Maybe that's fine for some people. It's just not the way I want to live. I'm not interested in it. I think I had enough of the crazy, terrible artist who's willing to sacrifice other people's happiness and lives as a young child to find it excruciatingly boring as an adult. It's just not something I'm interested in being around. So I think that method from him, I really absorbed into how I would like to move forward as a filmmaker.
Beautiful. Megan Winberg is asking, how much time do you spend with actors before the shoot? Do you rehearse, actually, I guess, during prep before you're on set?
Yeah, in fact, I try to rehearse on location, which is a huge headache for everyone. It means getting locations really early. It means people dressing them really early. That costs money. It costs the art department time. I need actors weeks in advance because I don't want to be doing this the week before when I'm pulled in a million directions by different departments. So no producer likes this. I'm convinced that all of the best moments I've found with actors have been because of this, because they've known their environments, they've known their blocking, we've had all the hard conversations around the scene, and Luke is always there for this too. And sometimes the production designer is there as well, so that people can kind of organize accordingly. Sometimes I film those processes and we can sort of rejig our shot list based on where the actors wanted to move. And I do this for a bunch of reasons. First reason is I don't want to figure it out on set with the whole crew standing around and waste the crew's time, but also the actors are then sort of under the gun figuring this out, and there's a lot of pressure. And if they don't like the way something feels, or they don't like a line or where they're moving, then it's incumbent upon them to be kind of difficult and hold things up, which as an actor, I would have had a problem doing. I mean, clearly I had no problem telling people they looked stupid like you, but generally I wouldn't have wanted to do that. So it saves us that stress. And yeah, I just think that the intimacy of it, you just find things and then you can be prepared. And then when you're on set, it just leaves so much more time for takes. Like, I like to do a lot of takes, and if you've figured out the execution of it and you can the actors can come on, show the crew the scene, that's sort of already been done, that private stuff.
It's a great answer, great question. Do you actually always stick to it once, if you've done something during prep with the cast in the actual location and then time passes and they think about it and you think about it, you get back together, does it actually really stay the way it was?
It has. In the two films I've done like that, again, Stories We Tell was much more loose in finding it, but yeah, it has stayed pretty close to that. And again, it's a process I started because I was neurotic and didn't feel like I knew what I was doing. I didn't want to hold up a crew and didn't want to seem like I was not knowing what I was doing. But now that I feel more confident, I think it's turned into, for me, the best process creatively. And some actors like it and some don't. Some actors hate rehearsing. And I think what I've learned is I just can't work with actors who hate rehearsing. I can on a project where it's going to be more improvised and finding it, but in general, I also can't work with people who hate prepping, because I love prepping and it's so important to me. So Luke and I are prep junkies and we're obsessed with, what we can discover and find out in prep. But I didn't know this, but lots of people hate prep. I didn't know that till really recently. I just can't imagine not wanting that extra time to figure it out. I respect the confidence that comes with not wanting to prep, but I don't got it.
Sounds like one of those great reasons to meet the actor well in advance when you fly around the world and
Yeah.
see the kind of question you want to ask them before you...
Have you ever met an actor that you thought you wanted and then you've met them and it's turned out to be not actually right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you wriggle out of that?
I didn't have to. In fact, he did.
Okay. That's
But
hard.
yeah, we sort of trying to talk about a script and the part, and every sentence ended with "and shit." So we're going to rehearse and shit, and then I thought, I don't know if I can. I can't do this. And so we left the meeting kind of just knowing that we did not find a way to talk to each other, and it was cool and shit. Tyson Caron is asking, because he loves stories we tell so much, are you going to make another doc?
I have a couple of ideas for docs that I would love to make one day. I'm just trying to figure out how I would do them. I think I've always had a rough time with the ethical stuff around documentaries and taking people's lives and making them appear a certain way for the sake of your story. And with my film, I had this really great, I actually like documentaries a lot more than other films. Like if I could choose to watch anything, it will always be a documentary ahead of any other type of film. So it's probably what I should make more of. But I think with stories we tell, I had this built-in safeguard, because if I messed with anyone's story for the sake of my film, I was going to have to live with that consequence, because I had relationships with all these people. They were my family. So I felt confident that I would kind of do the right thing. Even if people weren't completely comfortable with everything, I wasn't going to inadvertently twist something in a way that would really upset. I knew the players well enough. And it's not to say that everyone loved the film that was in it. They didn't. But I kind of knew what to include and what to not include to make it more bearable for them. Making a film out in the world with people I don't know that well worries me, because I feel like, I know there's some really ethical documentary filmmakers out there, but I also know people have been really wounded by being the subject of documentaries. And I think pardon? It's a huge responsibility. I mean, and when people do it well, it's, for me, there's no thing I would rather do than watch a great documentary. But I just wrestled with that myself. And I haven't yet been able to just take on the attitude of, you got to make the movie work. So you got to take out that thing they said that makes it less powerful, even though if it's closer to the truth. I can't quite wrap my head around that yet.
We're being told to go a little bit over time with a couple more good questions, probably so they can cut out all the bad stuff in the middle that we did.
Oh, good.
So I was actually wondering, a question ago, we were talking about your early process with cast, and I wonder, once you have those cast and you have those meetings and early rehearsals, do you actually ever rewrite the script to sort of reflect the strengths or capacities or interests of the actor that you're actually now tangibly working with?
Yeah, I have. I remember there were a few things in Away From Her that I had written that were not from the short story, that assumed certain things about Julie's generation that I remember her taking issue with. And it was a real fight. Like, I really fought it. I mean, I wouldn't now, but at 27, I really thought I knew better. And thank goodness she won that. She won those fights. So yeah, I have definitely shifted things. I don't know if if someone has a better idea, I will definitely go with it. But I think as an actor, I honestly don't remember ever changing a line. Like, I always felt as an actor, the lines that didn't work, that was the fun part. You had to make those lines work. That was your job. So I didn't love as an actor when an actor came on set and wanted to change the script or wanted to change a lot of dialogue. So I was like, that's not actually what I signed up to do, like your script. So again, unless it's the process that we're all creating something together and improvising and that's stated, I think that can be problematic. I've only ever, for the most part, I think actually generally had really good suggestions from actors who are not very obtrusive, but have had suggestions to make things better. So I haven't had problems with that, but that can get into sticky territory. What about you?
Olympia did come up to you with her big binder of notes with all the lines circled and reordered.
Did she do that?
Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
And
did she really? No, but what she did do is once when she and Gordon were first rehearsing their scenes, And I was sort of like buzzing about how I had seen it and how it wasn't quite how I had seen it and how to get them there. And I kept giving them direction, giving Olympia direction to get her. And she just eventually went, she like looked at Gordon and she went, what you're not commenting on is what's actually happening here. And I remember it's such a good note for a director, right? Like you're so in your head about how you see something that you're not actually witnessing what's in front of you, which may be better than what you imagined. So.
I have one final sort of comment question, and it's one on my list of things I learned from Sarah Polley, and it's about finding your role models. And it actually comes, we were just talking about Olympia Dukakis, and we all did a film together, and after that film, maybe after the premiere, we were at a dinner, and I sat with the two of you, and you were basically interrogating her. It was like, you had like a million questions for Olympia, from everything about acting and career to marriage. Like you were getting married or had just gotten married, and she had a 45-year marriage, and you just honed in there, and we talked about it because I was laughing, and in that case, you sort of said because you lost your mother when you were very young, that you would sometimes identify a woman that you could really learn from and be a sort of surrogate role model. And that spoke to me a lot. I had actually just lost my father at the time, and I don't think I mentioned it at the time. But how do you pick your role models?
I don't know. I mean, I think you just know, don't you? Like, you know when someone has a kind of way of being in the world and an energy that you would like to aspire to, or that feels so worthwhile and so of benefit to other people. And Olympia is one of those people. She's of such benefit to other people, you know. But you know, I feel like I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of people I feel that about, and I just think, yeah, I never want to let a moment go by and think I had access to someone that interesting and didn't ask them every question I'll wish I asked them later. I do remember in the conversation you're talking about, I do remember that it began, like we hadn't really talked that much at that point, and they're just turning to me and going, how old are you? And I think I was like 24, and he went, 24? You better be having great sex. If you're not having great sex right now, I will fucking kill you. I just remember going, I love her so much. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like with her, and yeah, I mean, I've been super lucky, especially when I was an actor. Just you get a lot of time as an actor. I didn't appreciate that before I started making my films. Like, you get a lot of time to hang out with all the interesting people on a set and ask them questions. You're not working all the time. It's kind of a great job. I don't know why I give it up.
I brought it up because of the context of today, because it's been 20 years since you had that great conversation with Olympia, and tonight you are in fact the mentor, the role model for everybody watching this, and it's come kind of full circle.
Thank you.
And to wrap it up, John Cassar made a nice statement that you are truly a Canadian film treasure, and we couldn't be happier for your success. We all look forward to seeing what more you have in store for us.
Thank you so much, John. Thanks, Tom. You were
Hey.
so organized. It was so nice. You put so much work into this. Thank you.
I had a great time talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you for everything. And I also obviously learned so much from you, which I didn't like go into, because these things can become like,
I didn't ask you,
thank you for everything.
Not to do.
Well, thanks to both of you. That was such a wonderful, genuine, honest, and fun conversation. Really, really, really a pleasure spending this time with you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. And to those of you watching, please join us on next Tuesday, for a masterclass with groundbreaking DGC director Clement Virgo, and Thursday for a masterclass with prolific director and actor Helen Shaver. It continues to be an amazing ride with these incredible creatives, and we hope it's providing some relief, some entertainment, and no doubt inspiration in these incredibly challenging and strange times. Be safe, be well, have a great night. Sarah and Tom, thank you again. That was absolutely wonderful.
Thanks.
Be well.
Thanks a lot.